"You're the only one with savings left, Mom, so you'll cover the mortgage," my daughter-in-law said while reaching for another spoonful of mashed potatoes as casually as if she were asking me to pass the salt. My son Brian didn't even look up from his plate. He just nodded once and kept cutting into his steak while the grandfather clock in the dining room ticked loud enough to make my chest feel tight. I sat there at the end of the table with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the two people I had spent years helping, sacrificing for, defending to everyone else. Outside the kitchen window, snow drifted softly across the backyard. The maple tree my husband planted 27 years ago stood frozen beneath the porch light, its branches bare and silver in the December wind. The whole house smelled like rosemary chicken and cinnamon candles, but suddenly none of it felt warm anymore. Melissa leaned back in her chair and sighed dramatically. "Honestly, Helen, we're drowning right now. Interest rates are insane. Groceries cost a fortune. Daycare is ridiculous. Family helps family." Her voice carried that polished sweetness she used whenever she wanted something expensive. I looked at Brian, waiting for him to say something softer, something human. Instead, he rubbed his forehead and finally spoke in the tired tone people use when discussing overdue bills or broken appliances. "It's only temporary, Mom. We just need help getting caught up." Temporary. That word settled over the table like dust. 3 years earlier, when they moved into the house after Brian lost his management job during the pandemic, temporary had meant 6 months, maybe a year. My husband Walter had still been alive back then. He'd insisted we help them get back on their feet. "He's our son," Walter used to say whenever I worried we were giving too much. "One day he'll remember everything we did for him." But Walter had been gone for almost 18 months now, and sometimes I wondered if kindness simply became expectation when repeated long enough. Melissa pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times before sliding it across the table toward me. I wrote down the amount we need. I stared at the number glowing against the white screen. Nearly $11,000. My stomach tightened quietly. "That would wipe out most of my savings," I said softly. Melissa shrugged one shoulder. "Well, what else are savings for?" Brian finally looked at me then, but there was no embarrassment in his eyes, only impatience. "Mom, we live here too. If the bank takes the house, we all lose." "The house. Not your house. Not Grandma's house. Just the house." As if the place where Walter and I spent 40 years building a life had somehow become communal property the moment they unpacked their designer luggage into the upstairs bedrooms. I looked around the dining room slowly. The cream-colored curtains I'd sewn by hand years ago still hung beside the windows. Walter's old jazz record sat untouched in the cabinet near the fireplace. Every inch of this home carried pieces of our marriage inside it. Yet lately I felt less like the owner and more like a tolerated guest. Melissa had already redecorated the upstairs living room in shades of white and gray because my furniture looked dated. She replaced the framed family photos in the hallway with abstract prints from an online boutique. Last month she laughed when introducing me to one of her friends and called me our downstairs roommate. I don't think she realized I heard her. Or maybe she did. The silence stretched long enough for the heater to kick on with a low hum through the vents. Finally, I nodded once. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. Melissa's expression tightened immediately. She had expected surrender, not hesitation. Brian let out a frustrated breath and pushed his chair back from the table. "We don't really have time for thinking, Mom." I looked at my son carefully then, at the tired lines around his mouth, at the way he avoided my eyes now the same way Walter used to avoid looking at hospital bills near the end. Somewhere along the way, Brian had stopped seeing me as his mother. I wasn't family anymore. I was backup funding. Melissa gathered the plates with sharp little movements, muttering under her breath about people who didn't understand financial pressure. I stayed seated after they left the room. The Christmas lights reflected faintly against the dark windows while the clock continued ticking into silence. Then slowly, very slowly, I lifted my eyes toward the hallway cabinet where Walter kept the property papers inside a small locked drawer. And for the first time in months, a thought crossed my mind that felt colder than the snow outside. The deed still had only one name on it. Mine. I barely slept that night. The old radiator in my downstairs bedroom clicked every few minutes, and each sound seemed louder than usual in the dark. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to rest and walked quietly into the kitchen wearing Walter's old wool cardigan over my nightgown. Snow covered the backyard completely now. The bird feeder near the fence leaned slightly under the weight of the ice, and the patio furniture looked ghostly beneath the pale security light. I filled the kettle with water and stood there waiting for it to boil, while the house remained perfectly silent upstairs. Sometimes silence tells you more about a family than words ever could. When Brian was little, this house never felt quiet. He used to run through the hallway in socks, sliding across the hardwood floors while Walter pretended to chase him before dinner. Every Christmas morning smelled like cinnamon rolls and pine needles. Every birthday brought noisy cousins, wrapped gifts, and folding chairs spread across the backyard. Back then this house felt alive. Now it felt careful, controlled, like everyone upstairs was trying to build a life that looked polished enough for social media, while pretending I was simply part of the furniture downstairs. I carried my tea into the living room and sat beside the cold fireplace. Walter's leather chair still faced the television exactly where he left it. I had not moved it since the funeral. Sometimes I still caught myself glancing toward it when something funny happened on television, expecting him to laugh first. The grief had changed shape over time. In the beginning it was loud and sharp. Now it was quieter, heavier somehow, like carrying a wet coat you could never fully take off. After sunrise, I unlocked the cabinet drawer in the hallway and removed the property folder Walter kept organized in thick manila envelopes. He handled paperwork the way some men polish classic cars. Carefully, methodically, every receipt dated, every document labeled in neat black ink. I spread everything across the dining room table while weak winter light slipped through the windows. Mortgage statements, tax records, insurance documents, utility bills. My reading glasses slid lower on my nose as I studied page after page. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed several late payment notices tucked beneath newer statements. My stomach tightened. I kept reading. 2 missed mortgage payments. Then 3. A warning letter from the bank regarding default risk. I stared at the numbers for a long time, trying to understand how things had gotten this bad without anyone mentioning it. Brian and Melissa still took weekend trips. Melissa still came home carrying expensive shopping bags from boutiques downtown. Last month, she had spent nearly $400 on imported Christmas decorations because the old ornaments looked cheap in family photos. Meanwhile, the mortgage was collapsing quietly behind the walls of this house. I heard footsteps upstairs around 8:30. Cabinet doors opened. Coffee machine. Running water. Normal morning sounds. I quickly gathered the papers before Brian came downstairs. Something inside me no longer wanted them seeing what I knew. Melissa entered first wearing cream-colored yoga clothes and holding her phone in one hand. "Morning," she said distractedly without looking at me. She opened the refrigerator, frowned dramatically, and muttered that someone needed to buy oat milk. Brian followed a minute later, already dressed for work, his tie hanging loose around his collar. He poured coffee into a travel mug and finally glanced at me, sitting quietly at the table. "Did you think about what we talked about?" he asked. I folded my hands carefully in my lap. "I am still considering everything." Melissa let out a sharp breath through her nose. "Well, we really need an answer soon." Then she walked away before I could respond. I watched her disappear upstairs again and suddenly remembered something Walter once told me years ago after a difficult holiday visit with his brother. "The fastest way to see someone's true character," he said, "is to let them become comfortable with your generosity." At the time, I thought it sounded cynical. Sitting there alone at the table that morning, listening to my son and his wife move around upstairs like owners of a house they could barely afford, I realized Walter had not been cynical at all. He had simply lived long enough to recognize entitlement when he saw it. Over the next few days, I began noticing things I should have paid attention to months earlier. Once your eyes open inside your own family, it becomes impossible to close them again. Small details start arranging themselves into something ugly and undeniable. Melissa spent money the way people scatter flower petals at weddings, carelessly and with complete confidence someone else would clean up afterward. Delivery trucks arrived almost daily now. New rugs, decorative lamps, expensive cookware still sitting unopened in boxes near the garage entrance. One afternoon, I walked upstairs and found 2 men measuring the kitchen while Melissa stood nearby holding paint samples against the walls. "We are thinking marble countertops," she said brightly when she noticed me. "The current ones make the house feel outdated." The house. Again. I stood there quietly while one of the contractors explained renovation estimates that sounded larger than what Walter and I spent on our first car combined. Melissa barely glanced at the numbers. "Once everything settles financially, we will move forward," she told him confidently. I wondered if she even realized the mortgage was 3 payments behind. Or maybe she assumed I would solve that problem before it could ever inconvenience her. That evening, I opened the mailbox before Brian got home from work. More envelopes from the bank. Red print this time. Immediate attention required. I carried them downstairs and sat alone on my bed staring at the papers while the television upstairs echoed faintly through the ceiling. Laughter from some reality show drifted down the hallway. Melissa laughing with it. Brian laughing too. It struck me then how peaceful people can seem when they believe someone else will absorb the consequences of their choices. I opened my banking application on my phone and studied my savings account carefully. The numbers looked smaller than they once had. Widowhood changes money. Medical bills. Funeral costs. Prescription refills. Property taxes that rise every year no matter how old you become. Walter and I had spent decades building financial stability, one careful decision at a time. We skipped vacations when Brian needed braces. We drove used cars while neighbors upgraded every 3 years. Walter worked overtime through flu seasons and back pain because he wanted us protected later in life. Looking at those savings now felt less like looking at money and more like looking at years of sacrifice stacked quietly together. The next morning, Melissa cornered me near the laundry room, holding a cup of green juice in one hand. "So have you transferred the mortgage money yet?" she asked casually. No greeting, no hesitation. I folded towels slowly before answering. "I am still reviewing my finances." Her expression hardened almost instantly. "Helen, with all due respect, this affects all of us." There was something strange about hearing a 39-year-old woman lecture me about responsibility inside a home I had owned before she even graduated college. "Brian is under tremendous stress," she continued. "You know how hard things are right now." I nodded quietly because there was no point arguing with people who had already decided your purpose in their lives. Later that afternoon, I drove to the pharmacy for my blood pressure medication and stopped for coffee afterward at a small diner near Main Street. Walter used to love the place because they served pie on thick white plates exactly like diners from the 1970s. I sat alone in a booth near the window, stirring cream into my coffee when my phone buzzed unexpectedly beside the napkin holder. I almost ignored it until I saw the name on the screen. Arthur Bennett, Walter's old attorney. I had not spoken to him since the funeral. For a moment, I simply stared at the phone while snow flurries drifted outside the glass. Then I answered. Arthur's voice sounded older than I remembered, but still steady. "Helen," he said gently. "I was reviewing some county records connected to Walter's estate, and I think there is something you need to know about your property." My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. Outside, a city bus rolled slowly past the diner window, spraying slush across the curb. Inside, the waitress refilled someone's coffee near the counter while Christmas music played softly overhead. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon. Yet suddenly I felt that strange sensation people describe before storms arrive. Quiet air. Heavy sky. The feeling that something important has already begun moving toward you whether you are ready or not. I met Arthur the following afternoon at the same diner where Walter and I used to eat breakfast after church on Sundays. Snow had stopped overnight, leaving the sidewalks lined with gray slush and frozen tire tracks. Arthur was already seated in the back corner booth when I arrived, wearing a camel overcoat and reading glasses low on his nose while studying several folders spread neatly across the table. He stood slowly when he saw me and gave me the kind of tired smile older people share with one another after enough funerals and disappointments. "Helen," he said gently, pulling out the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the booth and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup the waitress placed in front of me. Arthur looked different than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Age does that to men after retirement. But his eyes still carried the same calm sharpness Walter trusted for nearly 30 years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The diner smelled like bacon grease, maple syrup, and burnt coffee. A young couple sat near the window sharing pancakes while an older man in a trucker cap quietly read the newspaper by the counter. Ordinary people living ordinary afternoons. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my family sat inside the folders between us. Arthur finally opened one carefully and adjusted his glasses. "I was contacted by the county. Recorder's office last week regarding an old estate filing connected to Walter's trust paperwork, he explained. That is when I noticed something concerning. My stomach tightened slightly. Arthur slid a document across the table toward me. Brian attempted to inquire about adding his name to the deed several months ago. I stared at him. What? Arthur nodded slowly. The request was denied because the property remains solely under your ownership. Walter never transferred any portion of the title before his passing. For several seconds, I could only hear the soft clatter of silverware around us. My eyes dropped to the paperwork. My full name sat printed clearly across the top of the page. Helen Carter, sole owner. The words looked strangely unreal despite being true. Brian never mentioned any of this, I said quietly. Arthur folded his hands together. I do not believe he expected you to find out. The waitress passed by refilling coffee cups while Christmas music drifted softly through the ceiling speakers. Somewhere near the kitchen, someone laughed loudly at a joke I could not hear. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed. Yet inside me something had shifted permanently. There is more, Arthur said carefully. He opened another folder and pointed towards several highlighted sections. Your son refinanced portions of the mortgage debt 18 months ago. My chest went cold. Without asking me. From what I can see, he used household income statements connected to the property address and listed himself as primary resident. Legally, it exists in a gray area, but the larger issue is this. Arthur tapped the paper gently. The mortgage is approaching serious default risk. I looked down at the numbers again. Late fees, penalties, escalating balances. Walter would have been devastated seeing this kind of carelessness attached to the home he spent most of his adult life protecting. Can the bank take the house? I asked quietly. Arthur hesitated before answering. If payments continue falling behind, eventually yes. I leaned back slowly against the booth cushion. Outside the diner window, a plow truck crawled past, spraying dirty snow toward the curb. I suddenly remembered Brian at age 10 helping Walter shovel the driveway during winter storms. He used to complain after 10 minutes because his gloves got wet. Walter would laugh and tell him that real homes required work every season. At the time, Brian admired his father completely. I do not know when that boy disappeared. Maybe adulthood swallowed him slowly. Maybe Melissa simply gave shape to instincts already waiting beneath the surface. Arthur lowered his voice slightly. Helen, I need to ask you something difficult. I looked up. Do Brian and Melissa understand this house legally belongs only to you? I thought about Melissa ordering contractors through my kitchen. Brian calling it our house over dinner. The casual entitlement in both their voices whenever money came up. Then I shook my head slowly. No, I whispered. I think they already decided it belongs to them. Arthur studied me carefully for a long moment before speaking again. Then you still have one advantage left. I frowned slightly. What advantage? He closed the folder gently and held my gaze across the table. You can still decide what happens to the property before the bank does. The drive home from the diner felt longer than usual, even though the roads were nearly empty. Gray clouds hung low over the town, and dirty snow lined the sidewalks in uneven piles where plows had pushed it aside days earlier. I kept replaying Arthur's words in my head while the heater hummed softly through the vents of my old Buick. Sole owner. Foreclosure risk. You still have one advantage left. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the upstairs lights were glowing warmly behind the windows. For a moment, the house looked exactly the way it used to during Walter's lifetime. Safe, familiar, full of family. Then I noticed Melissa's new luxury sport utility vehicle parked beside the garage, still carrying a temporary dealership tag. I sat in the car for another minute staring at it quietly. They could not pay the mortgage, but somehow they could afford heated leather seats and a panoramic sunroof. Inside, the house smelled like vanilla candles and tomato sauce. Melissa stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone while stirring something on the stove. Oh good, she said without looking up when I walked in. Brian was starting to wonder where you went. Her tone carried the same casual ownership it always did now, as though I needed to report my movements inside my own home. I hung my coat carefully by the hallway closet and removed my gloves slowly. I stopped for coffee, I answered. She nodded absently before turning her phone screen toward me. Look at these backsplash samples. Which one looks more modern to you? I stared at the glossy photos for a second before realizing she was genuinely planning kitchen renovations while the bank prepared warning letters upstairs. I have not really thought about backsplashes lately, I said quietly. Melissa sighed as if I had become difficult on purpose. Well, if we are going to stay here long term, we should update things before they get too outdated. Stay here long term. The phrase settled heavily in my chest. Not once had either of them spoken about moving out. Not once had they discussed rebuilding their own stability somewhere else. Somewhere between Walter's funeral and those missed mortgage payments, my son and his wife had quietly transformed dependence into permanent expectation. During dinner, Brian talked almost non-stop about interest rates, inflation, and how impossible it was for younger families to survive in the current economy. I listened quietly while cutting roasted chicken into small pieces on my plate. Honestly, most people our age will never own homes outright, he said, shaking his head. The market is broken. Melissa nodded dramatically beside him. That is why family property matters now more than ever. Family property, not your parents' home, not your mother's investment. Their language had changed completely. Every sentence carried the assumption that ownership naturally flowed toward them simply because they wanted it badly enough. I looked at Brian carefully while he spoke. The silver threads near his temples had become more noticeable lately. He looked tired all the time now, but not from hard work. It was the exhaustion people carry when their lives become larger than their discipline. Bigger house, bigger payments, bigger appearances. Walter used to say debt changes personalities before it changes bank accounts. At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Now I understood exactly what he meant. After dinner, Melissa disappeared upstairs to take a video call with one of her friends while Brian remained at the table staring at his laptop. Numbers reflected faintly across his face from the screen. Bills perhaps, or maybe another refinancing calculator. Mom, he said finally without looking at me. I know things have been stressful lately, but once we get caught up, everything will stabilize. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. How far behind are you really? He hesitated just long enough for the silence to answer before he did. A few months. 3. His eyes lifted toward mine immediately. That tiny flash of surprise told me Arthur had been right about everything. Brian leaned back slowly in his chair. Melissa told you? No, I answered softly. The paperwork did. He looked away again after that. Not angry, not ashamed either. Just uncomfortable that I finally understood the truth. Upstairs, I could hear Melissa laughing loudly during her phone call, while Christmas music drifted faintly from the living room speakers. The whole house still looked beautiful from the outside. Garland on the staircase, stockings above the fireplace, warm lights glowing against the windows. But underneath all of it sat unpaid bills, quiet entitlement, and a son who no longer understood the difference between love and access. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I unlocked the hallway cabinet again and removed the property folder one more time. Then I sat alone at the dining room table beneath the soft yellow light fixture and whispered something to Walter's memory that I never imagined I would say aloud. I think it may be time to let this house go before they destroy what is left of it. The next week passed quietly on the surface, but underneath everything I began making decisions I never thought I would have to make against my own child. Arthur connected me with a real estate agent named Diane Mercer, a calm woman in her early 60s, who wore dark wool coats and spoke in the steady tone of someone who had spent years dealing with family disputes hidden behind expensive curtains and polite smiles. We met at a small office downtown 2 days before Christmas. A fake pine wreath hung crookedly near the front desk, and soft instrumental carols played through ceiling speakers while Diane reviewed paperwork beside me. The market is still strong in your neighborhood, she explained while sliding documents across the desk, especially for buyers looking for established properties with large lots. I nodded quietly while staring at the listing photos displayed on her computer screen. My home looked strangely unfamiliar through professional photography. The front porch Walter built himself, the stone walkway lined with snow, the kitchen where I taught Brian how to make pancakes when he was 7 years old. Diane pointed toward the estimated selling price and paused carefully before speaking again. If the property sells quickly, you could pay off the mortgage balance completely and still walk away financially secure. Secure. I had not felt secure in a very long time. I signed the preliminary paperwork with a hand steadier than I expected. Afterward, I sat in my car outside the office for nearly 20 minutes watching people hurry along the sidewalks carrying shopping bags and wrapped gifts. Christmas always makes loneliness feel louder somehow. Families become performances during the holidays. Smiling photos, matching pajamas, perfect dinners posted online. Yet behind many front doors sit resentments no one talks about until money gets involved. When I returned home that afternoon, Melissa was standing in the foyer directing 2 delivery men carrying oversized boxes into the upstairs hallway. "Careful with those," she warned sharply. "Those mirrors were imported from Italy." She turned toward me with a bright smile that disappeared the moment she noticed my expression. "Oh, by the way, Brian and I talked last night. We think it would make more sense if you covered the next 4 mortgage payments up front instead of monthly." I removed my gloves slowly while snow melted along the edges of my boots. For months, Melissa crossed her arms casually. It would give us breathing room. Breathing room. Another soft phrase designed to disguise recklessness. I looked past her toward the enormous, unopened boxes crowding the staircase. Imported mirrors, designer furniture, kitchen renovations. Every dollar spent like the future was somebody else's responsibility. "I am still considering my options," I answered quietly. Her jaw tightened immediately. "Helen, with all due respect, this hesitation is making things harder for everyone." Before I could answer, Brian entered from the garage carrying fast food bags and barely glanced at me. "Did you talk to her about the mortgage?" he asked Melissa instead of speaking directly to me. "I did," she replied. "She is still thinking." Brian sighed heavily and walked past us toward the kitchen. "We do not really have time for this." I stood there in silence while the 2 of them disappeared into the dining room, discussing interest rates and credit scores as if I were no longer standing 10 feet away. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped being Helen, stopped being Mom. I had become a financial solution with a pulse. That night after everyone went upstairs, I walked slowly through the house, turning off Christmas lights one by one. The tree still glowed softly near the fireplace, covered in ornaments collected over 4 decades of marriage. Handmade school decorations Brian made as a child still hung beside crystal angels Walter bought during our anniversary trip to Vermont years ago. I touched one of the old ornaments gently and felt grief rise unexpectedly inside my chest. Not grief for the house, grief for the family I thought lived inside it. Upstairs I could hear Melissa laughing during another phone call, while cabinet doors opened and closed above me. The house no longer sounded like home. It sounded temporary, like people passing through a place they never truly respected. I stood alone in the darkened living room for a long moment before finally pulling my phone from my sweater pocket and opening Diane's message from earlier that afternoon. One sentence waited at the bottom beneath the listing details. "We already have 2 interested buyers requesting private viewings after Christmas." I stared at the screen while the final strand of tree lights reflected softly against the windows. Then for the first time since Walter died, I felt something stronger than grief settle quietly inside me. Resolve. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in silence and pale gray light. I woke before sunrise the way older people often do, long before the rest of the house stirred awake upstairs. Snow covered the backyard in a smooth, untouched blanket, and the maple tree near the fence shimmered beneath a thin layer of ice. For a few minutes I sat at the edge of my bed listening to the heater hum softly through the vents while remembering older Christmas mornings from years ago. Walter in flannel pajama pants making coffee before anyone else woke up. Brian running downstairs too fast in footed pajamas while carrying wrapping paper scraps everywhere he went. Music playing from the old stereo in the kitchen while cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. Back then our house felt crowded in the best possible way. Loud, messy, loving. Now everything felt staged somehow. Around 8 o'clock, I walked upstairs carrying a casserole dish for breakfast. Melissa had already arranged matching holiday plates across the dining room table along with decorative pine branches and gold napkin rings she probably ordered online at midnight 3 days earlier. She smiled brightly when she saw me. "Perfect timing," she said. "Brian's sister-in-law is posting family breakfast photos later, so we should eat before the food gets cold." Even Christmas had become content for somebody's social media page. Brian entered the room wearing an expensive sweater I knew they could not afford. "Morning, Mom," he said while kissing my cheek quickly before checking his phone. Melissa spent the next 20 minutes adjusting candles and moving dishes around for photographs while Christmas music drifted softly through the speakers. Watching her fuss over appearances while unpaid mortgage notices sat hidden in the upstairs office made something inside me grow strangely calm. Not angry anymore, just clear. During breakfast, Melissa raised a champagne glass and smiled across the table. Here is to many more Christmases in this beautiful family home. Brian nodded beside her without hesitation. Absolutely. Family home. The phrase barely affected me now. I simply sipped my coffee and looked toward the living room window where snow continued falling in slow, quiet sheets. They had already written themselves into ownership emotionally. The paperwork simply had not caught up yet. Later that afternoon, Brian left to pick up a last-minute gift card for one of Melissa's cousins while Melissa sat upstairs wrapping presents and talking loudly on speakerphone with her friend Jenna. I could hear every word drifting down the staircase while I folded laundry near the hallway. Honestly, once the kitchen remodel is done, this place is going to look incredible, Melissa said proudly. A pause, then laughter. No, Helen will not go anywhere. She basically lives downstairs and keeps to herself anyway. More laughter followed. I stopped folding towels for a moment and stared quietly at the wall. Not because the comment hurt. Somehow that part had already passed. What struck me most was how comfortable she sounded saying it, as though I had already faded into the background of my own life. That evening, Diane texted me while everyone watched a Christmas movie upstairs. One buyer had withdrawn after finding another property, but the second couple remained extremely interested and wanted to schedule a full walkthrough immediately after New Year's Day. I read the message twice before replying yes. Then I locked my phone and sat quietly in Walter's old leather chair while fake snow drifted across the television screen upstairs and Melissa laughed loudly every few minutes at scenes she had probably seen before. The house glowed warmly around me, garland wrapped around the staircase railing, white lights twinkling softly near the fireplace. Yet underneath all that holiday warmth sat something hollow and exhausted. I realized then that the house itself was not the thing I was protecting anymore. It was the last piece of dignity Walter and I built together. The next morning, Melissa cornered me near the coffee maker while Brian showered. Upstairs. I have been meaning to ask, she said carefully, stirring artificial sweetener into her coffee. If we eventually converted the downstairs area into a guest suite, would you prefer a smaller bathroom or larger closet space? I looked at her quietly for several seconds. She actually believed I would spend the rest of my life tucked beneath their floorboards like an aging relative they tolerated out of convenience. That is a very long-term conversation, I answered softly. Melissa smiled without noticing anything beneath my tone. Exactly. That is why planning ahead matters. Upstairs, water pipes rattled briefly as Brian turned off the shower. I looked toward the staircase and suddenly saw the entire future they had imagined for me. Smaller space, smaller voice, smaller life. A quiet old woman financing their comfort while slowly disappearing inside her own home. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was about to do. The first showing happened 3 days after New Year's Day while Brian and Melissa were both at work. Diane arrived exactly at 10 in the morning wearing dark boots dusted with snow and carrying a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Behind her stood a married couple in their early 70s dressed in matching navy coats. The husband introduced himself as Robert. His wife smiled warmly and said her name was Elaine. There was something calm about them immediately. No rushed energy, no performance. Just two older people looking for somewhere peaceful to spend the next chapter of their lives. I led them slowly through the house while Diane pointed out details about the property. Updated roof, large backyard, finished basement, strong resale value. Robert paused near the fireplace in the living room and ran his hand lightly along the mantel Walter built himself nearly 20 years earlier. Solid craftsmanship, he said quietly. I nodded once. My husband made it by hand. For a moment, grief brushed gently against me again, but this time it felt softer somehow, less sharp. Elaine wandered into the kitchen and smiled at the morning light spilling across the counters. This house feels lived in, she said, in a good way. I almost laughed hearing that. Lately, I had forgotten homes were supposed to feel lived in rather than staged for approval. Diane asked a few routine questions while Robert stepped outside to inspect the backyard through the snow. I followed him onto the porch, pulling my coat tighter against the cold wind. The maple tree stood tall near the fence line, its branches bare beneath the pale winter sky. Beautiful property, Robert said quietly while looking across the yard. You raised a family here? Yes, I answered. My son grew up here. He nodded slowly like a man who already understood more than I said aloud. Before leaving, Diane pulled me aside near the front hallway while the couple walked toward their car. They are very interested, she whispered. Possibly cash buyers. Cash. The word settled heavily in my chest. Fast closing. No mortgage complications. No waiting. As soon as Diane left, I walked through the house slowly in silence. Upstairs, sunlight spilled across the hallway carpet Melissa picked out 6 months earlier after replacing the older floral runner I loved because it looked too dated. The guest bedroom now smelled faintly like expensive candles instead of cedarwood the way it used to when Walter stored winter blankets there. Every room carried traces of someone else's vision layered over the life Walter and I built together. Around 6 that evening, Brian and Melissa returned home arguing softly about credit card balances before they noticed me sitting quietly in the living room. Melissa dropped her purse onto the sofa and frowned immediately. "Why does the house smell like perfume?" she asked. My heartbeat remained perfectly steady. "A realtor stopped by today." The room went completely still. Brian blinked once. "A realtor?" I folded my hands calmly in my lap. I wanted to understand the current market value of the property. Melissa laughed sharply, though nothing about her expression looked amused. "Wait, you are not seriously thinking about selling?" I held her gaze quietly without answering right away. Brian stepped closer now, confusion slowly hardening into alarm. "Mom, why would you even do that?" I looked at my son carefully, truly looked at him. The tired face, the expensive sweater, the man who once cried because he accidentally broke one of Walter's coffee mugs when he was 12 years old. Somewhere beneath all the debt and entitlement, pieces of that boy still existed. But they felt very far away now. "Because the mortgage is collapsing," I said softly. Melissa crossed her arms immediately. "That is exactly why we need stability right now." "We. Always we." Brian rubbed both hands across his face and sighed heavily. "Mom, selling the house would destroy everything." Something about that sentence almost made me smile. They still believed the house already belonged to them emotionally, as though my role now was simply preserving their future at my own expense. "I have not made any final decisions," I answered calmly before standing from the chair. "But I am reviewing all my options." Melissa stared at me with narrowed eyes while Brian remained frozen near the staircase. Upstairs, one of the hallway lights flickered faintly against the wall. The whole house suddenly felt tense and fragile, like ice beginning to crack beneath too much weight. Later that night, I heard Brian and Melissa arguing behind their bedroom door long after midnight. Her voice sharp, his lower and strained. I could not hear every word clearly, but I heard enough. Sell. Mortgage. Deed. Money. For the first time since Walter died, they sounded afraid. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt guilty for being the cause of it. The offer arrived 2 mornings later while freezing rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Diane called just after 7:30 while I sat alone at the dining room table drinking coffee beneath the yellow light fixture Walter installed himself years ago. "Helen," she said carefully, though I could already hear excitement in her voice. "Robert and Elaine submitted a full cash offer last night. No financing delays. Fast closing. They are willing to move immediately." I closed my eyes for a brief second and listened to the rain sliding down the gutters outside. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked as Brian moved through the hallway, getting ready for work. "What happens next?" I asked quietly. Diane paused only a moment. "If you accept, paperwork can be finalized by Friday." Friday. For days away. My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug while years of memories drifted silently through my mind. Birthday parties in the backyard. Walter repairing cabinet doors late at night after long work shifts. Brian learning to ride his bicycle in the driveway while I ran behind him terrified he would fall. 40 years compressed into one ordinary winter morning. "Send the paperwork," I whispered. Upstairs, cabinet doors opened and closed while Diane explained the remaining details, but I barely heard her anymore. Something inside me had already stepped across the line. By noon, the contract sat signed neatly inside Arthur's office downtown. He reviewed every page carefully while snow clouds gathered again over the city's skyline outside his windows. "Once closing is complete," he explained calmly, "the buyers legally take possession immediately." I nodded once. "And Brian?" Arthur removed his glasses slowly before answering. "Your son will need to find another place to live." There it was. The sentence I had spent weeks trying not to think about directly. Not because I doubted my decision anymore. Because no mother imagines her life ending with legal paperwork protecting her from her own child. When I returned home later that afternoon, Melissa stood in the kitchen opening packages from a luxury home store while Brian worked on his laptop nearby. Neither of them looked up right away when I walked in carrying my purse and coat. "Perfect," Melissa said absent-mindedly while pulling decorative towels from tissue paper. The dining room centerpiece finally arrived. Brian rubbed his forehead while studying spreadsheets on his screen. "Mortgage company called again today," he muttered. "We are running out of time." I stood quietly near the doorway for a moment, watching both of them move through the kitchen like people decorating a future already promised to them. Then the doorbell rang. Brian frowned immediately. "Are we expecting someone?" Melissa shook her head. I already knew. Through the frosted glass beside the front door, I could see Diane, standing on the porch holding a folder against her coat, while Robert and Elaine waited behind her near the driveway. I opened the door slowly and invited them inside. The entire atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. Melissa's face drained of color the moment she recognized Diane. "What is this?" she asked sharply. Brian stood from his chair so fast it nearly tipped backward. Diane remained professional and calm. "Good afternoon. I am here to finalize a few walkthrough details before closing." Brian stared at her blankly. "Closing?" I removed my gloves carefully and placed them on the hallway table before answering myself. "The house sold this morning." Silence hit the room so hard it almost felt physical. Melissa blinked once as though she genuinely could not process the words. Brian looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger at first. Shock. Pure disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes steadily. "I sold the property." Melissa let out a sharp, nervous laugh. No, you cannot do that." Arthur stepped through the doorway behind Diane then, carrying another folder beneath his arm. Calm, precise, legal. "Actually," he said evenly, "Mrs. Carter absolutely can." Brian turned toward him immediately. "This is our home." Arthur's expression never changed. "Legally, the property has always belonged solely to Helen." Melissa's breathing became shallow and uneven while Brian stared at me like a stranger. "Mom," he whispered finally, "you sold the house without telling us." For a moment, I almost saw the little boy he used to be standing there beneath all the fear and frustration. Then Melissa spoke again before I could answer. "After everything we are going through, this is unbelievably selfish." Something inside me settled completely at those words. Not sadness, not guilt, clarity. I looked slowly around the kitchen one last time. The imported decorations, the unopened renovation catalogs, the people who only noticed me once access to my home disappeared. Then I looked back at my son. "No, Brian," I said softly. "What was selfish was expecting your mother to sacrifice her future so you could avoid facing your own decisions."